Hello and welcome to this year's Amplexor Life Sciences 25th Annual Be the Expert Conference. I'll be your moderator over the next few days. My name is Matt Campbell and I've been supporting Amplexor Life Sciences for several years in a consultative capacity. Today we've brought together this week we have brought together some of the industry's leading commentators to discuss the most pressing trends driving life sciences today. Sessions will examine a wide range of topics from risk management in pharma to how cloud solutions can reduce volatility. We have a packed schedule this afternoon with Kelly Hnat of K2 Consulting, Steve Jens of Jens & Associates, and Amplexor Life Sciences' own Agnes Cwienczek. Before we dive into this afternoon's programme, a quick word about questions and comments. Time permitting, we will do a brief Q&A at the end of each presentation, so please enter any questions you have into the comments box, which can be found right there in the browser. So, without any further ado, allow me to introduce our first keynote speaker, Kelly Hnat, Principal at K2 Consulting and a recognised leader in RIM and IDMP with over 20 years' experience in the pharma industry, including active participation on the EMA SPORE task force. Kelly, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. I am going to, I'm not sure how to share my slides, but hello, everyone. While that's coming up, hopefully someone behind stage is going to help me with that. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think this is going to be a great conference. Been looking at the agenda and all of this. I'm being told to speak louder. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, great. And here are my slides. All right, so as we're kicking off the conference, getting the technical details all sorted out, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I was starting to say, you guys are going to have a great conference. Looking at the agenda and knowing all of the speakers that you're going to be hearing from over the next couple of days, really impressive agenda. So hopefully I will do it justice with my presentation. So with that, let's get started. So my topic today is preparing for IDMP in times of uncertainty. What now? We've already introduced me. Here's a disclaimer. This is all my ideas, my thoughts that I'm presenting to you guys. The topics that I'm going to cover in this talk are, first of all, looking at SPORE, FIRE, DADDY, all of the moving targets, and asking the question, what do we in industry prepare for now? I will make the point that structured product data continues to be important, and value beyond compliance is especially important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's not just a nice thing to say. It's actually a good reason to do all the work that a lot of organizations have already been doing before EMA sort of changed the direction a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to include throughout my talk some results from the latest GENS World Class RIM survey, which is very much hot off the presses. And in fact, in the next section, you'll be hearing from Steve directly about a lot of what we've learned in preparing the latest GENS survey. And I'm just going to share a couple of pieces from the structured data submission section of what we've seen. So EMA keeps changing the plan. What do we do? A year ago, we were all incredibly clear about what it was that we were supposed to be doing. We knew that we were going to have to be preparing to submit FIRE messages along with our ECTDs. We were getting ready to, we were putting the technology together in order to be able to do that. We were starting to prepare our data. We knew we were going to have to enrich and correct the data that was going to be migrated into PMS. Everything was very clear ahead of us. And then at the end of last year, everything changed. So what now? Looking at, oh goodness, it's not showing the slide the way it's supposed to well, anyway. So this is supposed to show you what things looked like before and what things looked like after, but my animations are not building correctly, which makes me concerned about some of the other things I'm going to be showing you later. But in any case, so what we knew was that we were going to be submitting XCBMPD until we had to submit PMS for centralized procedure. We were going to be able to decide when we made that transition we were going to have to enrich and correct our PMS data. And then later we would have to add in the MRPs, DCPs, and national procedures, and eventually XCV-MPD would be required. And hopefully, no, my builds do not work. This is going to be a problem. That's all right. So these things are all supposed to move over and show you what now looks like, which you will see in a later slide. But basically the point here is that everything changed. This little thing here down here called Daddy, which was a project that was already ongoing, even at this time last year, we weren't really paying attention to, and now it's become kind of the center of our universe. So the structured fire messages has kind of taken a back seat now. So can we relax? Not really recommended. This is what that slide was supposed to look like after it built. So the immediate future is clear. We know that we are going to be submitting XCV-MPD for some time to come, that we are going to get a first implementation of the DADI variations form later this year. It's going to become required in the early part of next year. And then at some point later next year, and by the way, this is not meant to be a clear schedule, so don't use this as, it's just sort of a sense in time of what's happening when. Later on next year, we're going to get a second version of that DADI variations form, and it's going to include a lot more structured data. At some point, we're going to need to enrich and correct our PMS data, but we don't know when that's going to have to happen. At some point, we're going to be submitting potentially structured data, but we don't know if and when that's going to happen. At some point, XCV-MPD will be retired. We don't know when that's going to happen, but all of the pieces are still going to happen in some form. So we really should not be taking our foot off the gas. So what is DADI? DADI is a web-based interface that's going to be replacing the existing PDF electronic application form that we all know and love. It is going to be a consumer of the PMS SPOR data. So it is going to be pulling information into the DADI web form from PMS and pulling up the particular product that we want to make a change to for initially the variations that we file. The initial implementation is going to be for the variations form. That PMS database that we're going to be pulling our product information from is going to be populated by a feed from XCV-MPD, which we all know and love and have been submitting data to for many, many years. That is going to be the source for that PMS data for the foreseeable future. DADI from our data submissions, even though we're going to start structuring data and submitting that structured data, is not going to feed into PMS until some later release. Maybe at the end of 2023 with the variations 2 form, maybe a little bit later. We actually don't know that yet. But that is basically the situation as we know it today. In terms of timeline, the first version of the DADI variations form is going to go live in October of 2022, and it will become mandatory in April of 2023, according to the current schedules. The form is only going to include partial structured data at that point. So product name parts and medicinal device information are going to be in the scope of that initial DADI form. There's a planned release of a DADI form in later 2023-ish that's going to include more complete structured data, and that will then become mandatory 6 months after its release. We don't have any detailed information about that next major release, but you can see it kind of over there to the right of this schedule where it says next major release or structured data fields. Some other key points about what's happening with DADI is that, well, I'm repeating myself, that second major release will occur in late 2023. That's where we're going to start to really see more structured data being required for us to fill out as we're preparing those forms for submission. The correction and enrichment of PMS data is not going to be required until after that second major release happens in later 2023. So XCV-MPD is going to continue to be required for the known future. It's going to be the source of information to populate the PMS database, along with the SciMed data, that is internal data from an EMA populated database that they maintain internally. We don't have access to that. So that's going to be how PMS is populated in the short term. So the order of the pieces have changed, but the focus on DADI doesn't mean that we don't have to get our data right. We are going to have to eventually enrich and correct that PMS data set at some point. And although the DADI version 1 form is going to be a little bit simpler for us because it's only going to have those couple of components of structured data, the variations 2 form that's going to come out later next year is going to be more complicated. It's going to look like what we imagined DADI was going to be when we first heard about it towards the beginning of this year, end of last year. And so that is going to become more complicated. So we are going to need to be ready for that. And, you know, the end of 2023 is not that far away. So how is industry responding to all of these changes? What you're seeing here is a slide from the forthcoming Gens and Associates World-Class RIM survey from the structured data submissions section. And what we asked the organizations who responded to our survey was, how have the changes to the EMA plans for sport implementation impacted your implementation plans? And what we found was some mixed responses to these changes in EMA strategy. 42% of organizations say that they're not changing their plans, they're moving forward as planned. Now keep in mind that this survey was completed by organizations during the February, March, very early April timeframe. So that's sort of the point in time when everyone was responding to these questions. We've got about 24% of organizations who have paused or not initiated their projects, waiting for clearer direction from EMA. We have some organizations who are reducing scope, some who are increasing scope, and typically from the conversations we've had with those organizations, that has a lot to do with incorporating XEVMPD into some of their automation plans, because we were anticipating XEVMPD was going to be retired, but of course now it's not going to be retired so quickly. So some organizations are adding capabilities in order to be able to better manage their XEVMPD data for a longer term. And we got about 31% of organizations are extending their schedules. Okay, so I've covered everything that I want to there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the stories that we've learned in the data from the World Class RIM study this year. So just looking sort of from the left to the right, one of the things that we always look at is what the strategies are that organizations are planning to implement as they prepare for structured data submissions. That can include SPOR, but also other structured data submissions like PQCMC, Health Canada, Structured Product Monograph, other types of structured data submissions. Overall, so what you see here in the light green is the responses that we had in 2020. And the dark green is the responses that we had in 2022. And these were our top 2 strategies in 2020. One was implementing the systems and processes and data governance that would allow organizations to automatically generate structured data submissions. And the second one there is identifying the additional internal business use cases for structured regulatory data. And we see that overall, the percentage of companies citing strategies for automation and also the value beyond compliance dropped from 2020 to 2022. But when we look at just our large and mid-tier cohort, it has remained pretty steady. So that doesn't show on this chart, but for our large and mid-tier cohort, 68% of organizations say that they're planning to implement the systems process and data governance to automatically generate those structured data submissions. And 61% are planning to identify additional internal business use cases. So in the middle, just looking at the automation. So as we started to talk about how we were going to be preparing for the iteration 1 FHIR messages, what we heard a lot was about automating that flow of data from the original source systems to populate those IDMP data sets. And that's actually proven to be fairly challenging in my own consulting work. I found that it's very rare that Supply chain systems, for example, are sort of ready to go to be able to feed that information in, even in the context of some sort of master data management component in the middle. There's lots of complexities there. And so what we're finding is that very few organizations have plans to fully automate that flow of data from the original source systems. Our large and mid-tier cohort are a little bit more likely to be fully automating. Where we're seeing more adoption is with partial automation. So automating the flow of pieces of that data from the various source systems across the enterprise. And then, of course, we've had these changes in EMA strategy that we've been talking about, moving from that FHIR message submission to DADI. The chart there on the right, what we see is the data about the impact to confidence in EMA. That's the first two bars of that chart. And also the internal credibility of organizations to retain the necessary budget. That's the third bar in our chart. And cross-functional support for implementation is the fourth bar in our chart. That dark red is significantly reduced confidence. The light red is somewhat reduced confidence. The light green is no difference. And what we found interesting in a lot of the comments that organizations submitted along with their responses to this question is, in many cases, that no difference means that actually they didn't have an enormous amount of confidence in the first place, so it hasn't made much of a change in their confidence in EMA's ability to implement PMS or in the timelines that they provide to us, which are those first two bars in this chart. Moving on. Okay, so here's the thing, EMA is still driving towards a target operating model. We're not going to see that in the initial implementations because the DADI data that we submit is not going to flow directly into PMS in the initial implementation. But this is a slide, and by the way, all of these slides from EMA are coming from the most recent DADI PMS webinar. There's a link in the slides here if you have access to that. Otherwise, you can find it on the DADI implementation website, a link to these slides. It's very valuable. If you did not sit through this webinar, I would highly recommend that you do. This is one of the slides that EMA continues to present at all of the webinars that they do about these topics. And this is the data-centric target operating model that they ultimately want to see implemented. And what this is capturing data as part of the regulatory process, assessing and analyzing, making sure that it's accurate as part of the assessment process, and then storing it and reusing it. And we've talked many times, those of you who've heard me talk about the target operating model in the past, know that this is really a strong way to ensure that we get data in our PMS system, ultimately, that is going to represent accurately the registrations for the products in Europe. It's going to take a long time to get there, but this process is going to ensure that new data that gets added to that system would be accurate and be complete and accurately represent our approved dossiers. So we want to see this happen. This isn't happening in the outset, but this is the ultimate goal that EMA has. So we need to be thinking about that. We need to be prepared for what we're going to have to do as our part as industry in preparing for that. When they have that authoritative, accurate data set, it can be leveraged for so many use cases across Europe in support of public health. So this is something we are all very supportive of and want to see ultimately happen, but it's going to take some time. But how this is being done is what I call in-process data management. And it's a very powerful way to achieve high quality data sets. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the PMS data set that we have now is high quality because we haven't implemented that target operating model yet. We haven't reviewed that data, we haven't corrected and enriched that data. But ultimately, this model will achieve a maintenance process that is going to ensure that all of the data that goes into the PMS system over time will be high quality, and that data set is going to improve over time and ultimately be a good data set for supporting all of these use cases across Europe. But let's focus on this concept of in-process data management. And let's think about it in the context of our own internal data and our own internal RIM information. We all want our RIM data to be authoritative. You know, I've been around for a really, really long time, and I've been implementing RIM systems for a very, very long time. And back in the day, when we first started establishing these capabilities, what we were really looking to do was to have a place that we could keep track of all of our registrations. We could keep track of when our renewals were due or our PSURs were due. We could use that information to help us understand what the impact of changes were so that we could make sure that we were submitting to the agencies, the changes that we needed to when we had these big sort of complex regulatory data sets. But at the end of the day, it was about internal sort of use cases, reporting. It wasn't really looked at as an enterprise asset. And I think as we get to authoritative data, we can start to look at our registration information as an enterprise asset. What makes data authoritative? So if it's complete, if it's single source and accurate, then we have authoritative data. And in-process data management, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more during this talk, can achieve that authoritative data. So for it to be complete in our processes, that data must be created and updated as part of the process. For it to be single source, we need to have one system that's designated as the official repository of record for the data. That doesn't mean that it's the only system that holds information like this, but it's the repository that is the repository of record for the data for this particular business case. So I'll give you an example. When we look at our CMC data and the structured CMC data that we're going to need to support IDMP, that data, the official source, the place where that data is created and changed is in our supply chain organizations. But as we're preparing for it to be used for a regulatory purpose and submitted for a regulatory purpose, that regulatory representation of that supply chain data should be specified. And that may not be, and is probably not, your supply chain system. So you've got to designate the system in the example that I'm giving that would be your official repository for that CMC information for a registration submission purpose. And then that data needs to be accurate. We need to make sure that it's right. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. The business process outcome could require accuracy to complete successfully. So in our CMC example, for example, that data in that repository that's representing what's approved at the agency could be used to support supply release. And so that means that data needs to be accurate in order to support supply release. Or an alternative is to have quality review steps that are in place to ensure accuracy. Sort of the 4 Eyes principle is a good one that a lot of organizations use. You want more than one person looking at that information to ensure that it is accurate and to correct it if need be. So let's talk about how this can work in practice. And this is a couple of slides that you're going to see that are supposed to be builds. So I'm supposed to be telling you a story, but I'll tell you that story. We'll miss the builds. So what you're seeing here is an ordinary product change process. Your change gets raised, and in this example, we've got a proposed shelf life upgrade from 18 months to 24 months. So we raise that change. We've got a proposed shelf life of 24 months. We do a regulatory impact assessment, that proposed shelf life of 24 months. We then prepare our documents, we submit or we publish and dispatch that submission. The health authority reviews it, they approve it, they implement it. That is an ordinary product change process that every organization uses. And going to the next slide. So thinking about how our registration system supports that process, when we get to the regulatory impact assessment, we can use our registration system to identify those impacted registrations, to record that regulatory event, to update the submission status when the submission is published and dispatched. We can record our health authority interactions during the assessment process. Once it's approved, we can record that approval. We could propagate that information back to supply chain and implement that change from a supply chain perspective. If we take it to the next level and we actually contain the granular data within our registration systems, we can control that data through our business processes. And this is what I've been talking about. So in our registration system, we identify those impacted registrations. But if we're holding those CMC particulars in that registration system, we can actually identify those impacted data values and record those proposed new data values in the registration system in those CMC details. And then once we get that ultimate approval, we can update the status of that data from proposed and then submitted to approved. And then we could share those approved data values with our internal stakeholders, supporting perhaps a supply release. And this process that I'm showing you and walking you through is what we would call an in-process data management process. And when we manage the specific product details in that way, those registration details, so things like, your proposed shelf life or your packaging details or your formulation details, you can support the data requirements by, generating a report from the submission to support, a report from your registration system to support preparing that data form. And it will also give us submission-ready data for eventual IDMP messaging requirements. So we're able to generate that IDMP message with those proposed new data values, and we're managing that. We know that data is right because we're managing it as part of that variation process that we all go through, that we handle all the time. We're just adding to it the maintenance of those structured data particulars as part of that process. In-process data management is very powerful, and I've been talking about, the idea of supporting product release and improving our license compliance. This is one of those things that is so important for industry, is to ensure that we are releasing product to markets in compliance with what is registered in that market. And that is an area that a lot of organizations have struggled with over the years. It's an area that I've been working on for many, many, many years. And we still haven't quite reached, perfection in that particular problem yet. So, but if we are managing that data as part of our process, we know exactly what the submission and approval status is of that data for those particular markets, we can support product release and very much improve our license compliance. And in fact, I've done this in the very long past, and found it to be very effective. So that's one of the use cases for structured registration data. What other kinds of superpowers does our structured registration data have? So when we establish an authoritative regulatory data set, we get a range of opportunities beyond compliance. First of all, a harmonized view of data is very powerful, supporting data integration. We can actually achieve some true data interoperability when we're all across the enterprise speaking the same language about our product families, or other information about our registered products. Harmonizing data standards across the organization establishes a key for connecting the systems and data across the enterprise. We also improve capabilities to automate and integrate systems across functions in that way. If we have high quality product data, we can also power enterprise data analytics. So we can expand the power of our enterprise data analytics by incorporating that regulatory data set, which previously hasn't been in a lot of organizations a part of the information that we're looking at in our data lakes, in our data analytics, and can be an authoritative source for our registered, our registration status, our registered markets, our registered product particulars for those enterprise systems. And when we establish a single language for product data, we start to break down those departmental silos. We can improve efficiency for cross-functional business processes like the CMC variation process that I've just walked you through. And we can improve our overall license compliance by having a common view of those planned and approved regulatory particulars. And we can improve our business outcomes. We can improve our time to market, cycle times for change, improve our product compliance, have readiness for future structured data submission requirements. So many things, so many opportunities, even beyond what I've talked about here. And when we look in the world-class RIM study at our top performers, what we see is that they are very likely to be leveraging strategies to extend access to the regulatory data across the enterprise. And the items that are highlighted here on this slide from all the submission strategies are the ones that are about leveraging regulatory data across the enterprise. And what you can see is our top performers overwhelmingly plan to do this. When you compare that, and that's the light green in this chart, when you compare that to everyone else, which is the dark green bars in this chart, they're also looking at these things, but they're a little bit less likely to be planning to implement that. And in our study, in the World Class RIM study, we really like to look at top performers as a great model for how we should think about working as we go forward in our organizations in industry. They're a great model for us to follow. So how do you go about doing this, bringing in-process data management into your RIM environment? First of all, you've got to define your process. You identify those in-process touch points, those places where that data is part of your process and can be leveraged and managed within your systems as part of that process. Build that process to fit your own business requirements. You've got to look at your own business processes, how your organization functions, and what is the best match for your own organization. And one thing to really think about is efficiencies. When you make someone's job easier by refining a business process, you're more likely to get adoption of that process. This middle part, the last mile, this is something that we've been talking a lot about over the last few weeks, which is actually, I've been talking about it for a lot for the last few years, which is what are we doing at the affiliate level? When we look at our registration data, a lot of times it breaks down at the affiliate level. And the reason for that is because at the affiliate level, they've often got local business and regulatory requirements that are not necessarily met by our enterprise level or company-wide level registration management systems. And so what happens is they establish some local tool to be able to track and manage that information that they've got to be able to do for their own market, to keep compliance in their market, or to be able to sell in their market. And so that becomes very important, and it takes away from the importance of the enterprise system. So it will impact oftentimes compliance to that global RIM system, because we all know that the folks in our affiliates are often wearing multiple hats. They've got very big jobs to do. And so they've got to be able to prioritize, and commercial viability in their own individual market is always going to take precedence, and it should. So how can we manage that? How we can manage that is to really understand what those local market requirements are and try to find ways to enable those capabilities within our enterprise level registration systems. When you address those gaps, then you start to improve that local compliance, because your tool becomes fully capable of supporting all of the requirements in that local market. This is a very, very hard nut to crack, and something that I've been working on for many, many years, and something that really at your own company level you can have a look at and see what are those things that we could do to improve life for our affiliates with our own registration management system. And then you've got to, with this and with everything else, manage that change. And change management isn't about making sure that everybody's happy, but it's about making sure that the organization understands the journey that we're on, what that ultimate goal and vision is, and what the benefits are going to be to them, to the organization across the enterprise. Talk early and talk often when you're making change, and engage those naysayers, engage those folks who think it's maybe not a good idea. They're grumbling about it in the background. Find out what that's about, because that resistance is often great input into your planning process, understanding what are people worried about, what are people grumbling about, why do people think this might not succeed. When you tackle those problems, you're going to be more likely to have a successful outcome, and in the process those naysayers are going to become your advocates in your implementation. And so that can make a very, very powerful tool for your implementation. So to kind of summarize, when you establish a vision and a strategy for the regulatory data in your own organization, focusing on that value beyond compliance, that helps to clear all of those cobwebs around, what is it that EMA is doing? What are the plans? What are we supposed to be prepared for? There's so many things that we still don't know. Hopefully those things are going to start to become clear in the coming weeks and months. But what I would encourage everyone to be doing is to be sort of setting that aside and thinking about it as a use case to ultimately support. But maybe it's not the only reason why we're doing this. And that can help you to clear the way and the vision for your own implementation and your own plans, and also to keep the uncertainties that come with these inevitable sort of changes in strategy and direction and timelines from the agency from impacting the plans and the success of your own internal implementation. So with that, I am finished with my presentation, and I think there are, I've been seeing some comments go by, so I'm imagining there's some questions. Rely on Matt to help me.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for that. Fascinating stuff. Yes, we've got a few questions here, so why don't we kick off? First question: why has the EMA made the change from the FHIR message submissions approach to DADI? What's the key driver?
So there are some bigger changes happening at EMA in terms of how they're looking at telematics and how they're planning for implementations and how they're executing implementations. They're moving to an agile methodology and sort of bringing together some of the silos that in terms of implementing different things to kind of look at this in a bit of a bigger picture. And with all of implementing all of those sort of agile processes and I can't think of the word that I want to use, but all these sort of agile ways of looking at things, I think they sort of saw that DADI was happening, DADI was going to be using this PMS data, and we're implementing PMS. Let's kind of leverage that to go first. I think that's pretty smart. I wish they were thinking about the implementation of that in a more thorough way, but that's essentially the crux of where these changes are coming from.
Okay, great. And if we wanted to move to the data management approach you described, how do we start? Where do we start?
Yeah, so the first thing to do is to look at the data that you want to manage and look at the business processes that are associated with that. Just kind of take a good look at everything and look at where the data that you have that isn't strong, why is that data not strong, and really dig into that. Really dig into what are the root causes of the data challenges that you might be having today. Couple that with looking at what are the business processes that impact the new data that you may need to be collecting and managing as part of the IDMP compliance piece of the puzzle, and just kind of make just an overall inventory of all of that and look at it and start to think about how does this all fit together and what are the business processes that we could be looking at and impacting in order to really kind of make a move going forward. And then pick something small and just do a piece and do it piece by piece. That's a good way to start the process of change without making it an enormous sort of painful organizational effort, that's going to make things difficult. So if you are able to kind of pick off those high impact areas and do those piece by piece, and then just kind of build on that over time.
Okay, great. Well, as is normally, oh, here's some more questions coming through now on screen.
Is there any new information on potential availability of the DADI API? Yeah, so Renato, that's a brilliant question. Okay, so we want to see the ability to have machine-to-machine communication of data. So being able to pull data out of our registration systems, use some sort of API in order to be able to upload it into the DADI form. That is not a priority of the DADI project right now. I don't know when we're going to see that. Hopefully we'll start to see something that looks like that as we move into the version 2 variation form, but I don't have any sort of firsthand information about what is going to be in the scope of that version 2 form. I don't think that's necessarily being looked at yet, but it is not something we can be planning for today. Hopefully it's something that we're going to be seeing in the not too distant future.
Okay, great. I think that is us for now. As is usually the case, we're running a little bit ahead of time because we always want to make sure it's better to have time to spare, so we can call a quick coffee break and reconvene here at 3:05 for Steve Jens, who will be talking about near and long-term RIM strategies. So yeah, everyone can have a break and we'll see you in about 15-20 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Kelly. Bye. And welcome back to this afternoon's session. Our next guest, Steve Jens, needs little introduction. He's got over 30 years experience in the industry and is the founder of Jens and Associates, a leading life science information management and organizational consultancy. Today, he'll be exploring how companies are evolving their near and long-term RIM strategies. And before he does so, just to reiterate that if you have any questions that you want addressed at the end of this session, please drop them into the comments box and we'll happily tackle them when the presentation is over. So without any further ado, over to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and it's good to be back here. My first experience with Be the Expert was in 2016 in Salzburg, and it was a very big event because we released our first world-class RIM study, and I'm really pleased to mention that today we're releasing our 2022 world-class RIM study, and I think Kelly Hnat, who's also on the core research team, probably gave you a few glimpses of some of the study results and the structured content authoring. But what I would like to do today, there's a lot to the study, and we actually are releasing 2 studies today, the most in our 17-year history. The first one is on the world-class RIM, and the second one is an update, a follow-up study from COVID-19 regulatory impact. So there's some really interesting things going on there. So what we're going to be focusing on is how are companies evolving, investing in the near and long term. So there's a lot of things in the survey that really get into different types of investments for the base RIM capabilities. We'll go through those in a second. Strategic initiatives, how are they investing in the organization, and advanced technology. We redid the advanced technology side. So I feel like I'm at the DIA show, and you have to show the disclaimer. So we have the disclaimer here, and we'll move on. So the 3 things about what we're going to learn today, I'm going to start you off with just 2 slides, and slides that we made about 1.5 years ago, because every 5 years, we want to look ahead 5 years. And it's always nice to see where have we been, where we are now, and where are we going. So that's going to ground us. And then the meat of the presentation is going to be in the world-class RIM, some preliminary highlights. Again, we are going in production and sending out versions this week to the 76 participants and our membership too. And then we have 5 or 6 slides just to give you what we think are really, really interesting things from the COVID-19 follow-up study. So getting started. So about 18 months ago, we're thinking about, well, what would RIM 2025 look like? So there's just a few key things in here. And what's interesting from the survey, a few of these topics here, we have specific benchmark slides. So let's start at the bottom of the slide and work our way up. What we see, and in any organization, when you modernize, some people call it transformation, we call it modernization. It's typically a 7 to 10-year cycle. We're updating systems, we're updating processes. There's been a lot of that. We're going to see the data in a moment. but you're really focusing on regulatory functional excellence. And what we see is the big change over the next 3 to 4 years is really cross-domain, the regulatory, quality, clinical, ERP connection. Now, some of that is because of IDMP SPOR, but a lot of that is driven for the more advanced companies as they're working end-to-end change control or end-to-end label management, working on those end-to-end processes. So we're starting to see a shift, and everybody has been talking over the last year or 2 years, we're going from content to data, that's kind of obvious. But it's the cross-functional, aspect and the data sharing that's really important. So we have the majority of the companies starting to come out of the modernization phase. It's really interesting, the data, we quantify that, went back to 2016. I know Kelly talked about structured data submissions, but the data connectivity aspect. And that's when all this conversation we've been hearing for 2 or 3 years now about cross-domain analytics, advanced technology. But what we see here in these boxes, and we're going to drill into some of this from the survey, the data quality sustainability, having high data quality, meaning data governance, which is very immature and regulatory right now, and continuous improvement, business excellence. There's a lot of different names from it. The other thing we find very interesting, there's been so much focus on the process and systems that most organizations have been pretty static, except maybe there's new RIM groups and all that, but we're starting to see a lot of new roles, in regulatory. So on the next slide, our last one on the RIM 2025, a little bit about the past, the present, where most companies are at, and kind of in the future. So we have, going back 6, 7 years, there was so much focus on we need global systems, we need global processes. There has to be a better way. Regulatory is highly effective at what they do, but highly inefficient. And a lot of this, I'm only going to cover the green stars, you can read the rest, is we need to be better connected. And we have to rethink all our siloed systems, our spreadsheets, our SharePoints and processes. Where most companies are now was what we call the global capability modernization, and we've quantified that, actually going back to 2014. So around 2018 is where a lot of end-to-end process work are starting, the maturing of some of the end-to-end platforms, like the Amplexor platform, increased connectivity, although that's very aspirational for a lot of companies. However, our top performers, those that have hit our strong performance level or world-class, and we had another company hit world-class this cycle, they're a lot further along in being connected up, in the enterprise. And then some of the organizational aspect, formal RIM teams, most companies have those now, but continuous improvement, business excellence to drive those small changes to improve performance are becoming more common. Some companies are already in the far right, and we're calling it the digitization and organizational agility phase. And what's really fascinating and frankly exciting is the data sciences, and they tend to be cross-functional. And that gets into a lot of the advanced analytics and some of the advanced technology. The expansion of structured data submissions, there's so much focus on IDMP SPOR, but like here in the States, PQCMC, things in Canada and other areas are going to drive further automation. And RIM, in our first survey in 2013, we posed the question, is RIM a corporate asset? And we knew back then that the answer was yes. So we're actually really realizing that. So let's get started in the study. For those that are not familiar with our work, we have what we call RIM-based capabilities. And we use the word capabilities because it implies the system, process, and organization. It's just not a system thing. So for those in the audience, if you're looking at this from a business, maybe you're in regulatory affairs or operations, you look at all the standard processes, or if you're more in technology, you'll see, a lot of different types of systems here. I'm not going to read these off, but these are identical to the 15 we used in 2020, and there was probably about 90% of them in 2018. And it's all the typical processes as far as, creating dossiers, dossier management, working with the health authority, managing your registrations, the label management. If you're a device company, design history file, Reg and Tell, which is becoming a big thing, you'll see that. And on the right-hand side, we slightly expanded this because most of this is system to system, 1 through 9, some of the clinical systems, ERP, QMS, and all the way down at the bottom, you're just going to see a big, big push on master data management, especially with the larger companies, the data lakes. There's a lot of expressions for it. We just call it the pooling of information from multiple systems. So for those that are not familiar with our research, really, especially on the left-hand side, we're going to have some very busy graphs for you about how people are investing. Where are they investing these base capabilities today, and in the next 2 or 3 years. So let's continue on. It's always proper in any type of research to give a little bit about the demographics. We have here on the right-hand side just the breakout by headquarter location. But what we're really excited about this time around is we used to just have 3 tiers: large, mid-tier, and small, and we do it by revenue. You can see that up here, although the very small is either no products or 3 products on the market, and that's the early scale time. So we have a great distribution of the large, mid-tier, small, and very small. And what we did with the analysis, we kind of cut it right in half. Although we do a tier analysis for each one of the 4 tiers, you're going to see some of those slides. But large and mid-tier companies have some similarities. A lot of it, they're battling complexity. They're working on speed and efficiency. And the smaller companies, it's all about scale and speed. So I'm not going to read through like all the purposes of the study. We're going to be focusing on the first one, the investment priorities. But the other things that are not in this deck about, each participant gets a comparison to their true peer group and all participants. Really looking at the maturing of the RIM connections, long and short-term strategy and structured data submissions. That was Kelly's section. Advanced technology, we're going to see one slide more from an investment there, and everything you wanted to know about the software and regulatory service providers in this. So let's start where we left off in 2020, and we came up with this performance triangle here, which we believe is very, very significant and still true in 2022. So let's concentrate on the right-hand side in the graphic, because the better an organization is at on the organizational and process work, they're going to get a lot more benefit or value from their systems and the advanced technology tools. We call them value-added tools, and therefore they're going to maximize the benefits. So some of the organizational aspects we're going to explore is data governance and data quality. That is an organizational matter. Continuous improvement. We look at process, from a maturity. And how we came about this is with our benchmark and some of our client work. We've worked with over 120 organizations, and we know what works and more importantly, what doesn't work. The second statement is still true. Since 2014, there was no correlation with our top performers in 6 studies now to any one software provider or system strategy. They just do the organizational and the process work better, and therefore they get more value out of the systems and more business benefits. And you're going to see that clearly in the data. So that's something just to keep in mind if you're about to go through a major modernization. So we always have key headlines, and we have a lot of detailed write-ups on this, which we were still working on late last night. But I wanted to give you a sense of some of the key themes. And if you're not a participant or one of our members, you won't have access to the detailed, study. But what we do put in the public eye, and we're shooting for the end of the summer, is our white paper, and it's usually 10, 15 pages to really, what are the key things we learn? So these are 4 things that were very, very clear out of the block. And we're going to be exploring these in debriefs. You're going to see very clearly today how the investment focus is shifting. So instead of talking about that, let's just look at the data. What we found very interesting as we've been tracking a lot of the advanced technologies for the last 6 years is in some ways, and I wish I had a better way to express this, it's a little bit all over the place. You have providers pushing things in one area, industry very focused in a few areas, and we'll see that focus specifically by size of company, the tier analysis, who is working on what. It's kind of a heat map. You'll see that in about 15 minutes. But having a very clear, we work with a lot of companies, a clear digitization strategy, and that's just not technology. That's technology, process, and a lot to do with the organization agility and upskilling the data scientists. Having a clear, cohesive, say, if most of you are in a regulatory digitization strategy, which aligns more, with R&D digitization strategy. The other thing that we're very excited, because we did some major research 7, 8 years ago, and we always check in a little bit on these large studies. And in 2023, we're going to get back to the affiliate level and solving the last mile. That's a term from Kelly Hnat on the core research team. And you just heard from Kelly. And we still see some of the greatest challenge to have an effective global RIM capability is still at the affiliate level. So we call that solving the last mile. And we'll tackle a little bit of that today. And also, we interviewed those that achieved world class in 2020 and those what we call emerging world class. One of those emerging world class made world class this cycle. That culture makes a difference. So we actually asked some interesting questions around culture, and I have those results for you today. So that's the setup. We're going to get into some pretty detailed slides now, folks. So this is the first one. There's a lot of, this is our dashboard on kind of how industry is doing. And again, if you're not familiar with the research, let's start with our spindle here, the world-class RIM. We have 5 categories. There's 11 questions, and it deals with data quality confidence, business benefit results, global access, level of efficiency of those 15 RIM capabilities I just showed you, and time to report information. So I'm going to go around the spindle. We're going to start in the left, and we're going to go kind of clockwise around. But the bottom line, there's incremental performance increase with a lot more work required in the data quality. And we're going to hit that one pretty hard today, especially from the data governance. And hopefully there's something you can take back to your shop or to your clients to help you out. So we have a thumbs up here in time to report information. There's 9 different reports, if you will. And the question gets around how much of your information in regulatory is real time versus maybe it'll take a day, several days, or greater than a week. And in the yellow here, if you can't read it, that's the last study in 2020. We do this big study every 2 years. And the green is 2022. So this is actually good news. This continues to increase every 2 years, more real time. And we think that's because 2 things. We know Amplexor has invested quite a bit in their dashboards and analytics. So on the provider side, there's better capability on this. But on the industry side, it's better control of your data. Do you trust your data where it can be real time and you can make decisions? Now, speaking of data quality, and I have some slides on this, this is something we're still kind of itching our heads. The blue line here, we have high, medium, and low, and there's very clear definitions of what those are. So the high confidence, and I actually have the detailed slide in this deck for you today, gets into, it's increasing slightly, the moderate slightly decreasing, but overall, the level is coming down. But we have different splits, like how are our top performers? They're doing substantially better. And why are they doing substantially better? And we have that answer for you today. This gets really, really busy here. Again, we're comparing 2020 to 2022, metrics, program characteristics. But I want you just to look at 2 things here. The one thing we care about quite a bit and been tracking, there really isn't that much progress. There was a big jump up from 2018 to 20 is, do you have a continuous improvement program or business excellence? And the other thing that was really good to see here is our metrics are, impacting or finding efficiency and productivity opportunities. So for us, that's data-driven continuous improvement is where you want to be. If you talk with your colleagues in manufacturing, that's what they do every day. Now we continue on, and we saw this big jump up, affiliate use of global systems. So it's the submission content management, your registration management, health authority interactions, reg and tell, label management, those different type of capabilities, or modules if you're in an end-to-end platform. So there's continued progress, although when we look at our strategic initiatives, only 32% have global RIM adoption, but almost everybody else is working on it. It's a big goal. So that's why we see we're towards the end of this modernization cycle. And the other thing we were really delighted to see is a big increase in the efficiency rating, again, of those 15 RIM capabilities. Now, even though the 56%, if you're for those with kids, if your son or daughter came home with a report card that said 56%, at least here in the US, that's considered an F and not good. But that's the average of the 15. Some of them are up and around 80%, and then some of them are very low, like the analytics and reports, label management, submission forecasting. The efficiency of some of those capabilities are very low. So that gives you a sense broadly of where industry's at. But we're going to drill down now. We're going to get into the good stuff. So again, this segment's focused on where's industry investing. So on this slide, and you're going to see a pattern, these are those 15 RIM capabilities on this. And we see in the dark teal or the green, recently completed. The blue, and we see a lot of the blue is changing now. And if you combine the green and the blue, that's the sort from the most completed and working on now the most to the least. Will change in the next 2 years. That's the green. Will change long term or not planned or not applicable to the situation. What is very, very significant is that's when we said the first headline. There is a shift going on where people are focusing on is that typically we see a lot of green, a lot of we're going to change it in the next 2 years. So when we go here on the right-hand side, we track back to 2016, and we can see change within 2 years is the green line. And if we add the long term, that combination is the red line. And we can see there was a lot of plan change, which happened in 2018 and 2020. We can see these dark green things were almost non-existent 2 to 4 years ago, that a lot of the modernization is getting completed. So we're at the tail end. So the question is, what's next? What's next? And what we see is a lot more advanced technology implementation and experimentation, a lot more process optimization via the continuous improvement. But this focus on cross-functional connectivity, the data sciences, and involving the organization, and there's some more to this. So, and for those that are interested, the top 5, that companies are working on: submission planning and tracking, health authority commitment management, dossier management is a real big one. Over the last 4 years, there's been so much focus on health authority interactions, the Q&A process, and finally, regulatory archives and reporting and analytics. So that was our first busy slide. So let's continue on. This slide gets into strategic initiatives. And again, you see very little in the green as far as completed, but a ton of the blue. We're currently working on these, and a substantial amount of green. No plans in the yellow or not applicable. And the majority of these initiatives, they're multi-year projects. So the ones, again, you can see the sort, the combination of the green and blue from left to right. So the big 4, maybe we'll include the 5th one, RIM system and business process simplification. And that's been the story of the modernization. How do we simplify and connect? We want to get better global RIM adoption. In that dashboard, I gave you that stat. We have most of the top performers are there. It's just everybody else that's working on it. Improved data quality, real-time dashboards and key regulatory information. And certainly, I think this is consistent. Everybody wants to improve their product filing strategy. And a lot of that gets into dossier management and strides in dossier management, content planning, wave strategy. Now, in the green, we think this is kind of more strategic use of data and the next wave of work, although there's a lot of companies that are working on it, but there's a lot of companies here in the green that they're going to start in the next 2 years. So we're going to see this theme. We need to formalize data governance for regulatory information and cross-functionally. We need to improve regulatory intelligence. We will be doing a small pulse survey on regulatory intelligence this fall. So at the end, you'll see my contact information. If you're interested in participating, just send me an email. Strategic data management and e-labeling, is coming up. And what's interesting, a lot of this is completed is more in the large tier companies. There were 16 of them, and 63% are there for global RIM adoption, 38% for the dashboards, a quarter of them improved filing strategy, and 38%, a lot of companies are working on global dossier strategy. So this gives you a sense of some of the strategic initiatives, and maybe some of these you're working on in your shop. So let's continue on. The data governance, the data confidence. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but you can see, and I already listed a lot of them, about what we track: the regulatory submission archive, the doc management, XUB/MPD, registration, labeling, commitments, Reg and Tell, health authority interaction, submission forecasting, UDI of your device. So the dark green says that high confidence. We had that in our kind of overall industry map. Moderate confidence, meaning there is some remediation, a lot of verification, which is not good. It takes a lot of productivity out of the organization. Low confidence or no authoritative, source. So when we look at our top performer average, it's around the dark green is around 66%. So they're almost all green here. And then everybody else is way down here on the 30%. So how do we achieve it? Everybody wants better data quality, in their systems. So how do we do it? We do it through data governance. And this is our data quality framework. We based a couple of questions on the survey off this. So people have governance bodies, maybe it's a data quality committee. There's different names for it. We have a very detailed 3-tier data quality model. If that's something you're interested in, you can follow up with me. But there's a lot of supportive processes in how you manage consistency. This is all about consistency, authoritative source management, having clear roles, data stewardship. How are they, aligned? For mission critical data, there should be clear data ownership, transparency of reporting, tying to rewards and recognition systems, and compliance oversight, make up our model. But there's two aspects of it. There's the operational side, which tends to be easier than, which is the structural work, and then the cultural work, getting people on board and staying on board. And that's why we call it data quality sustainability. How do you sustain the good quality of data over time? So on the operational, it tends to be processes and capabilities, structures, committees, roles, data quality checking, thresholds, a lot of details on that. But getting people on board and staying on board, and this gets into a culture of quality of that. So let's drill into this a little bit more. Kelly actually did this analysis, but before we get into what all these markers made, the model I just went through is how we structured some of the questions. So here we have the formal data governance. Does it adhere to corporate data governance? Do regulatory executives advocate for a culture of quality, dedicated data quality roles? Mission critical data elements have clear data owners. Data quality levels and key authoritative sources are measured monthly, and the reporting is very transparent. And data quality is tied to reward systems. So we have two cuts of this. So the first one is on the slider graph. And what Kelly did is those companies that are far along and very active in the SPOR IDMP implementation, in the orange, they're a lot further along on this scale than everybody else. But let's look at that scale very closely. We have no plans. We're planning stage. We're trying to implement it. We have implemented and we're trying to improve it. So that's where, the people that are active, and we don't have anybody in the optimized. It's still early days, and the maturity level is very, very low. However, and I just saw something from Matt. There might be some questions, and we'll take those at the end. So please bear with me. I timed it to have about 5 minutes for a Q&A. Besides IDMP SPOR, what I mentioned earlier, a lot of for companies that are especially the top performers, and there's 16 of them, and they're represented in the dark green compared to everybody else. So this is the same thing: formal data governance structure, corporate data governance. It's the same thing. It's just a different graph, but you can see a big difference. Let's look at the ones that there's a really large difference. Regulatory adheres to corporate data governance. So there's the alignment cross-functionally. dedicated data quality roles or jobs. Significant difference there. This is interesting, 42% to 0. Data quality levels and key authoritative sources are measured at least monthly, and look at the transparency, difference. And most, even top performers, are not tying it to reward systems on that. So it's still early days, and we've worked with a number of organizations in the last 3 years, getting them unstuck. They made a try at their data governance structure and changing the culture, but they get stuck, and we help them get unstuck. So let's see what's next. We're going to switch gears now, and we have 2 slides. This one I'm going to go through pretty quickly. And this gets into the business benefits, and it's more of a reference slide, for you. Now, this is not all companies, the 76. It's only our top performers. We have our little top performer logo here, because what we wanted to show you is the possibility. What are the benefits that our top performers are getting? And the blue is achieved and optimized. You see partially achieved, which is good. We're making progress. We're getting some good business benefits. You see a lot of green there. Targeted within 2 years. The goal was not achieved. So it was just reduced operating costs for like 2 or 3 companies. What's significant here, if we add the achieved and partially achieved together, and that's the sort, the average for the top performer is 82%, and everybody else, it's 33%. Now, the reason I'm showing this, and the top performers, what they're realizing is better speed, better data quality, which gets them to real-time information access, which gets them to better decision-making, reduced complexity, and they're really good with process integration. But what I would encourage you to do, if you're just starting your journey of change, you're struggling with a business case, there's a lot of these business benefits. You can use this for a reference, like access to real-time information, increased data quality, speed to respond and react to regulatory a change. Will move over better submission planning. That gets into resource management, better outcomes for an inspection. So there's a lot of business benefits, and these are the typical ones we see in business case. So this is what we say is the opportunity for all these companies, that there's a lot more value, and that's the title of the World Classroom, Accelerating Business Value. So there's still a lot of value to be realized for a lot of companies. But let's take a different look at this. And for those that tend to like the words, there's different business benefits by size of companies. So let's actually start, and the significance of the bold means it's common to all tiers. So let's not start with the large multinationals. Let's start with the very small companies, those with 0, 1, 2, or 3 products, the early scale day. So they're just getting into new markets. So they're dealing with their first time operational complexity, like everybody else. Let's have access to real-time information. Let's make sure the data quality is there. But we're starting to integrate processes, and we're starting to do a lot with the health authorities. The small companies, access to real-time information, reduced complexity. I'll just do the top 2 now. Mid-tier is very different. Improve the outcome of an audit and inspection, speed to respond and react to a regulatory regulation change. And the large companies getting better data quality, real-time access to information. So this is another good reference slide for you. So we're going to shift gears here, and we're almost done with the segment. And a few slides on the COVID-19. We'll take some questions. So this is one of the slides that Greg made, and the next slide, I think it's going to be easier to read. But we really thought and worked with a lot of different experts about all the advanced technologies. But they're not all the same, so we categorized them here. We have what's foundational, like half the companies are working on master data management and reference data management. We have the metaphor of the tree. We need a strong foundation for that tree to grow. Some strategic things such as data hubs, AI, natural language generation, which is getting interesting. And then some more of the transactional stuff. Everybody talks about robotics, a lot of interest in structured content authoring that's going up, business intelligence. And again, this is a reference slide that you can read. But what we focused on is, where are you going to have significant, moderate, low, or no investment? So we thought a better way to kind of get a handle on this, and where is it happening, is this heat map. We threw the data into Excel and sorted it. So these are all the advanced technologies that we tracked. I'm not going to read through them all. And this is all responded. 74 out of the 76 companies responded, and we sorted this for the most interest, meaning what's a significant and moderate investment. And we didn't put a dollar or a euro, on this, because say if there's a 500,000 euro investment for a very small company, that's a very big deal. For a very large company, that just could be a proof of concept. So here we have any time where you see the green, that's greater than 50%, of the participants in that tier. And in the red, it's, less than 10%. So you see a lot of zeros here in the small and very small, because these types of technologies are just really not applicable to them at their stage of maturity of their company life. So the ones that we have highlighted is the highest per tier. So in the mid tier and the small, the big one is master data management. The big ones, big, large multinational, 80% of them, almost all of them, is that pooling of data. And interesting, very small companies, there are a third of them are focused on business intelligence. So finally, rounding this out, I had mentioned in the beginning, culture makes a difference. So we made a question out of this. So let me go through kind of what we asked here in the middle, then we can talk about the data. And we're going to shift gears on the COVID. Our regulatory strategy and vision is clear and well understood. There's shared clarity in regulatory roles and responsibilities. We do a lot of work on roles and responsibilities, and it's kind of really interesting gap here, having a clear vision, but there's not clarity on roles and responsibilities. We're an agile organization. We strive right the first time quality mindset, just like on the manufacturing line, just as that dossier is going to the health authority. This gets into innovation without saying it. We're willing to try new processes and technologies. Where it was the least amount is we have a established change management framework to guide our changes and transitions. The better companies that are at that, the less time they take and cost on implementation. And we can see here it's right in the middle. We're effective in implementation and execution of plan change, and we work effectively with other areas. And the scale was the classic. Do you strongly agree, or strongly disagree, disagree, agree, or strongly agree. So this is kind of all over the place. There's some things where companies strongly agree right the first time, innovative, regulatory strategy and vision is clear. And the things kind of in the middle were agile, even though everybody's talking about it. Effective implementation, about halfway there, but the change management, so we think there's a relationship there. The better the change management discipline could maybe move that execution block further to the right. So culture does make a difference. And when we averaged all these things together, we have a way of scoring them. Again, our top performers, they averaged 84%, meaning most of them were, way over there versus everybody else, which was about halfway there. So overall, some good news, but an opportunity to improve, especially on the change management capability. That's kind of a key takeaway. So that's switch gears. I have about 5 or 6 slides I'll go through quickly. On the follow-up, we did our first one in the fall of 2020, and we followed up over the last few weeks, and then I'll take some questions. So where did we leave off? The same thing in 2020 with the COVID-19 regulatory impact is these 4 things. In crisis modes, organizations can find quicker paths without sacrificing quality. And we had some really, really interesting data, because what we did is, do you have a COVID-19 product or you don't? And there was a massive change in between. Large scale organizational change doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes people overcomplicate big change. We're going to see speed to be accomplished. Again, that cohort of COVID-19, those with COVID-19 products versus those that aren't, and ways of working are changing, and it's kind of a changing dilemma. So when we did the first survey, it was 6 months into the pandemic, and we had this crisis mode, recovery, and renewal. That's the model we built. And you're just acting out of necessity. We all had to go remote, right? But we've been in it for a little over 2 years. It feels a lot longer. But you're starting to reimagine and shifting and reimagining a better way. What is possible? We're more working different, hopefully more smarter. And then there's a new normal. So our viewpoint on how organizations are evolving are we now in this new normal, which is constantly evolving? Because there's some really interesting conflicting viewpoints. So some of the headlines we're seeing on the report that's being produced today, we have a slide very clearly on this, it might be next, about the difference between those with COVID-19 products and not, and the acceleration of product development through a lot of process and technology change. Again, you see this theme of digitization, acceleration, and I think the big thing is large-scale digital upskilling to be very productive in the virtual environment. You're going to see that massive shift, and then a really interesting slide. This one, we have a very, very interesting slide for you today about that socialization, in-person contact, going out to lunch, the water cooler, going out for a coffee. And there's really a shift in organizational culture, which is good, but also concerning. But people rated team effectiveness as very, very high. However, still struggles, being virtual for those that are onboarding new team members, managing conflict virtually, in kind of group brainstorming. So let's just look at a couple of the slides. This is the one that was really, really interesting for me. So here, those with the COVID products, it was about half the population, or no COVID products. And you can see that the drastic change. But what were the questions? Yes, process change has accelerated how we develop new therapies products. The same point, but technology change has accelerated how we develop new products. How our organizational collaborates. So you can see dramatically, and it's more the process change here, the dramatic change, and they picked up a lot of speed. And the inverse here is our approach to new therapies product development has not changed, and you see the complete opposite there. So really what that tells us, you're those, and we have many of our clients have COVID products, the vaccine makers, therapeutics, and also, the testing kits. And they had to reimagine things very, very quickly, kind of time to patient. It wasn't so much time to market, time to patient. And they found new pathways, and they truly were in crisis, mode, although we all were in crisis mode, but the pressure to get that out with the same level of quality. So they found quicker ways to do things, which all of us could learn from. So that's point number one. And Matt, I did see your thing about 10 minutes left. I think I have 5 minutes left on content here. Remote work effectiveness. 12 months ago, 57% say they were ineffective, and today 60% say they're very effective. But look at some of the comments. The longer work hours due to not commuting are starting to wear on me. This was telling for me, we increased our efficiency so much during the pandemic that there's a concern that the organization won't understand the potential drop in effectiveness now that we're back in the office. We're going to lunch, we're traveling for conferences, we're having that coffee break with colleagues. Here, this is busy, but the easy takeaway, this is in 2020, where some of the organizational that people really like the flexible work hours, but there was a decrease in work productivity, half of them, but 78% I can do my job just as well remotely, and that has changed quite a bit. The effectiveness is really high. So what we saw in 2020, there's currently an expectation for us to be in the office, which was very high, and it's flipped. So in 2022, they disagree. So the flip is in favor of remote work and expectation, but the big question is the deep embedded cultural and organization practice, such as meeting, client interactions, training, and how that's being impacted. This is the slide that's very, very telling on this. And we looked at ways of working, what's increased, no change in the blue, or decreased. So these top three things are very, very significant. We talk about long-term burnout for some, ability to disconnect from work. You see a lot of decrease, building and maintaining relationship with internal coworkers, ability to balance work life and personal life, that boundary. But the rest of it's actually really strong, impromptu meetings, availability of work colleagues, personal work productivity, working remote and flexible. So I think this might be just one or two more slides. This one really quickly, as far as how's the interaction with the health authorities. Overall, very, very positive through the pandemic. 82%, but a lot of them thought, not everybody thought it was considered innovative, but there's progress, less reliance on paper, Participants were happy with more of a fast forward approach. I'll skip due to the time some of the yes, but some of the how is the interactions innovative, and some talked about their internal, like regulatory commitment and health authority Q&A systems, the flexibility of authorities to work outside of boundaries, extremely fast two-way interactions, inspection versus document review, and virtually. But there was good news about that interaction with the health authorities. And finally, we'll leave it on a good note about the overall effectiveness. This is very effective in the green and the blue and across the board in the different publishing, dossier management, doc management, registry, label, reg and tell. Very positive, but we said about the effectiveness in our world-class room study, you saw the efficiency is actually lower. So I powered through a lot of information there. Certainly would love to take some questions, and here's my contact information. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and hopefully, again, there's some stuff that you could take back to your shop. So with that said, Matt, do you want to help me out with questions, or I just went into the comment box? So how do you want to?
Absolutely, Steve. Firstly, thanks for that. Fascinating stuff, some remarkable insights to chew over. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions which will take us up to the end of the session, I hope. Firstly, why are companies having such trouble with data quality?
Oh, that question has been bothering us for a very long time, and I think it's simple. Data quality is an organizational matter, and it gets into consistent data governance practices across regulatory systems. And what typically happens is there's one way to do it for your registration management, a different way for submission content management, a third way for label management. There needs to be consistency in data governance, standards, assigning of data steward roles that's just emerging, and working cross-functionally, because a lot of this data moves around the organization. So it's working with the colleagues in R&D, corporate or the enterprise, and also in the ERP. So it's consistency of practice, and it's still very immature in regulatory. So hopefully some of those slides are helpful for people.
Okay, great. Personally, what did you find most interesting? What were the most interesting results from the survey? What really stuck out?
Yeah, for me, and we're going to learn. We're starting the debrief process actually next week with our community debriefs, and we have a lot of private debriefs with our members, and we're going to learn along the way on that. But the biggest thing that stuck out for me is the big shift, kind of the tail end to a lot of companies modernizing and now taking that next step into more advanced technology, changing the organization, being, people have been talking for the last 10 years of connecting regulatory and registration to other areas of the enterprise. And it's kind of like now that the new foundation is in place from the mobilization, the next step is the connectivity and more automation cross-functionally. That's why that first slide was so important, going from regulatory focus excellence to cross-functional focus. We think is very substantial in the next 3 or 4 years.
Okay, great. And finally, will it be available to the general public? What's the process? How do we get our hands on it?
Yeah, for companies that participated and that are in our membership, they're going to get the results this week. But for everybody else, we have a white paper. It takes us a couple of months to write. Towards the end of summer, that will be out in the public eye. On our website, we have this area. It's called Knowledge to Share, and that's where we put our public white papers, Matt.
Okay, great. And I see we've got another question coming on screen from Renato at Amplexor Life Sciences. You can probably read it there, Steve. We've seen on the chart large organizations investing in SCM.
The structured content management. We've been tracking this for 10 years, and it's back to a peak of interest, meaning there's a lot more proof of concepts. And we've kind of shifted our view. We've always viewed this as pragmatic, that from a medical device, it's more of an engineering standpoint, like engineering drawings, that having structured data is easier to do. So structured content management is a lot further along on the device side than it is on the medicinal. But with things like PQCMC, natural language generation, more structured, and we know with the Amplexor platform, that's really big for you guys, having a lot of structured data. And the movement with different types of structured data submissions, we think the environment is set on the medicinal side that we're going to see an incremental adoption of structured content authoring and management, over the next, 2, 3, 4 years. So we think there'll be some breakthroughs there because the conditions are right for it. So we've changed our tune on the structured content management. We actually did, I think Renato knows, maybe seen the data. We pulsed 25 companies about their plans for structured content management back in August of last year. So, and that focused on that, not only the traditional reuse, but half of the participants were looking at natural content generation, like with the first version of clinical study report, for an example. So there's some really exciting things happening there, as opposed to a lot of talk over the last 7 or 8 years.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's everything, Steve. So thanks so much for your time. I know you're a busy man, and hopefully we'll see you sort of the same time next year.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much, and take care, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Steve. All right, well, we're through to the last session today from Agnes Cwienczek, who is Head of Product Management and Consultant at Amplexor Life Sciences. And today she's going to be talking about the impact of IDMP on RIM. So over to you, Agnes.
Great, thanks. Let me just share my screen. Okay, here you go. Perfect. Thanks a lot, and welcome everyone from my side to the last day of to the first day of BD Expert 2022, but to the last presentation of today. Just setting up a short disclaimer, as we have already seen before, about the views and the opinions expressed in this slide deck, which I will present today. My topic is to talk about the impact of IDMP, specifically on regulatory information management. And we will have a short agenda to go through, starting from the evolution of RIM and IDMP, so what happened in the last years briefly, then what actually is the impact of IDMP on our regulatory information management. And finally, we will also touch upon key aspects which are important to make your RIM solution IDMP ready. I will conclude my presentation today a little bit more from the theoretical part into reflecting how actually are we at the Amplexor Life Science Suite incorporating all these thoughts into RIM and IDMP aspects. As mentioned by Matt, my name is Agnes. I'm Head of Product Management and Consulting in Amplexor, and mainly responsible for the business process data compliance side of our RIM solution. I have more than 10 years experience in this area, and prior to joining Amplexor, I was working at the industry itself at Merck KGaA as Director of Regulatory Informatics and Submission Management. So let's start first with our first topic of today, last presentation, the evolution of RIM and IDMP. So how did RIM evolve over the time? And for sure, this is something which we heard a lot about today from Kelly as well as from Steve from different perspectives and angles. But this is somehow the summary from my perspective, how I experienced it when I was working in the industry, but also what I see across our client base, as well as companies who work in the pharmaceutical business. So the first beginning or the first steps in the area of RIM was really focusing on consolidating all our systems we have. And by this, we wanted to make sure that we have one single source of truth. And that was at least the belief at the beginning. Putting all the data in one system will enable us to better start managing this data on a global and partially also on a country level. We heard today that country adoption is still not present everywhere, but at least we manage the data from a central perspective in a global system. The focus was pretty much at the beginning on planning and tracking capabilities. So how do we plan our initial MAAs? How do we deal with variations, renewals, annual reports? When are they occurring? What are the key tracking points up to the agency approval? In addition to that, the next step, which came naturally after, was additional processes. So it's not only about tracking the key interactions, but actually all interactions we do with the agency, the commitments we receive, the conditions we have. So that's kind of extending the scope up even to using this data for product data submissions, our registration data, like XCV-MPD in the past and in the future as well. We also had first automations included because we realized that managing all of this data is quite time consuming, and also some repetitive tasks can be automated. So there was more and more demand to include those automations into RIM's system. Having all the data in place, we finally also saw that the data quality is not to the level we wish we would have, but we were not sure what is actually the quality of the data itself because we didn't establish yet the right baseline to measure it against this. The next natural step which came up was towards end-to-end, so considering not only planning and tracking, but really looking at the entire process from the trigger, which initiates, for example, a change, up to its implementation. And more emphasis is put on data governance. We heard this from Steve today. It's not only about simple data quality considerations, but how to implement a data governance framework within the organization, and more sophisticated automations to ease the life of the regulatory operations and affairs colleagues, also specifically in the countries, for things which can be automated more easily. The final step for me in this process is really to looking at a holistic RIM with the key aspects of connectivity and not only on connectivity of single processes, but potentially also across the organization, making sure that data is regarded in the central point of our considerations and about advanced or additional analytical capabilities, because getting the data only in is one aspect, but also being able to report on this data and take additional business advantages is another aspect of the story. In short, what happened on the IDMP side, I think I could fill out a full session about what's going on and what was done in the last 10 years in this aspect. But to make it more short, I tried to pull out a few important aspects. We started with global standards, as we know, published by the ISO. We went from these global standards because they tell us somehow this is the scope and the definition, but still not how we are going to implement it, which values at the end are we using. So we have to deal with regional implementations. And for Europe, specifically with our implementation guides and with the SPOR as the vehicle of the translation of the ISO standards in the EU for the substances, the products, organizations, and referential data. And finally, we heard also from Kelly today about DADI and how DADI came into the game. So I wanted to mention it as well, as it is the next one of the next things which industry will need to implement at their side. All of these issues started basically with a strong foundation. So we have to consider data model and data standardization first, before we can much broader look at the processes, how we exchange the data within the organization, but also within the network, which means within with the agencies and across the agencies, as well as the patients, and how we basically optimize our current processes in order at the end to have benefits for the industry, for the agency, as well as for the patients. Next, I would like to highlight a little bit about the topic of the holistic RIM, which I mentioned just before. So what does it mean for us, or what does it mean for me specifically? And a holistic RIM ideally has a bunch of capabilities. So it's not only about planning and tracking, even though the definition for sure can vary, but it is about all the aspects within a regulatory information management system. It's about managing master data and product data records. It's about knowing our registrations, being able to plan and track accordingly the entire process value chain, dealing with the documents we need to submit. We need to create them, we need to update them, we need to submit them. Prior to this, we need to publish them according to the standards we have in the specific region. We have to deal with product data submissions alongside with the document submissions. We deal with more interactions or key interactions with agency, which is not just about getting out this submission, but also all the key other interactions occurring, which might have an impact on the content or the timelines of our submission. We have to consider commitment and condition management. So what happens post-authorization? Which post-authorization measures do we need to implement? Labeling management is one specific area which deals with producing the labels itself, but also tracking the safety variations or the safety changes associated with label updates, which is a very critical capability, especially because it touches immediately the healthcare professionals and the patients who are reading these labels on our drugs. Finally, we heard also about intelligence, how to make our systems smarter in order to accommodate all the different regional aspects we need to consider. Regulatory is not a global thing. The regulatory at the end is a very local undertaking, which needs to happen according to agency standards. And at the end of everything, we also want to report on the data and use this data for meaningful purposes, not just for the pure compliance. And looking at IDMP, the question is, where is IDMP? Well, is IDMP really something which is standalone, or a next bubble in this circle, or is it already part of all of these specifics which I just mentioned? And why does it all matter? So why are we talking all the time about these aspects? Well, the volume of data we know is constantly growing. So we had data before, but we are capturing more and more data, and more data is captured also in a structured way. We have higher needs to digitalize what we know, what we do. We saw we need to move away more from paper. We were successful in the past, but there are still areas which are pretty much paper-based. We have also evolving standards which are pushing us, and sometimes that's really good, towards this direction. The complexity in change management is also going up, to have a good oversight of all the impacts and dependencies and to be able to manage them. We all know how difficult it is to go and find all the information, bring this information together to understand what is the real impact of this change in order to be able to manage it properly. We want to reduce errors and reworks we need to do, reduce repetitive tasks our people need to do so that they can focus more on the strategic work, which really matters to the business and brings added value at the end, by better utilizing our resources, improving our operational efficiency. And a very important aspect as well, we saw it in the last years of the pandemic situation, how to decrease the time to approval or the time to market to bring important and necessary medicines to patients much faster. Connectivity, especially cross-functionality, will become a must. We are collecting on consolidating in different silos, across different departments. But once we manage to get to a mature state, we also need to expand this cross departments, because at the end, the entire value chain is not only produced in regulatory, but throughout the entire organization dealing with it. And all of this should improve our decision making, the strategy planning and be able to better forecast for the future. So what's the impact of IDMP on RIM? So a very short illustration of how IDMP future could look like if we don't do anything around it. So we have a standard process which starts from planning of activities. We do compilation of our documents. We track all of this. We compile, meanwhile, also data for data submissions across all the different regions. We deal with publishing and submission management. We track this. We have Q&A sessions, questions and answers. We update our data. We track it again until we reach a final approval. And that this process didn't really change on a high level. It remains the same. I remember 10 years ago, I was drawing it already when we were dealing with implementing RIM systems within companies. All of these activities might, depending on the system landscape, happen based on different data models and also using different languages we speak or different terminologies. And that's just an illustrative example of the most involved systems we are talking typically about, which is like our RIM system, our DMS system where we manage our documents. Then for the data, we use again RIM or our product information management system. Finally, we publish everything in a publishing system. And when it comes to the loop of Q&A with the agency, we go again through the entire loop of all that. And at the end, hopefully get an approval and manage it in our RIM system. Majority of the flows and majority of these connections are still very often manual or semi-automated. We export data and import data around, which has a certain drawbacks, of course, because it's really complex for cross-system analytics, for cross-system tracking, also data exchange itself. And one important aspect which I would like to mention is also the increase of importance of connected publishing. While I see that RIM and product information is very often already today managed in the same system, we still have a lot of independent publishing system. And looking at the future IDMP target operating model and the fact that we will have one day to submit our product data as part of our ECTD, then the connectivity also to our submission management becomes more important in order to be able to track our data submissions within our publishing. What's the IDMP impact on RIM? We saw today that the IDMP itself impact has not only the dimension of systems, it has an organizational dimension, it has a people dimension, it has a system and process and data dimension. But looking at the pure system dimension, I think these are kind of important things to highlight. We deal with an extended data model because we have now a framework of data definition which needs to be captured. We have some more standardized terminology, and I would like to highlight at least regional, because still the way how we deal with terminology is not worldwide aligned. So we have different standards, but at least on a regional level, we try to get into one definition which is used across the industry as well as with the exchange with the agency. External connectivity and exchange of data can mean within the company itself, but also to connect to the agency specific system in order to share and exchange this data with them. We need, it will change the way we deal with processes in our system. So either from the way planning and tracking is done, but also how those processes are connected amongst each other. We have to consider an extended user base. So it's not only regulatory people who might need to have access, but we also need to consider that this extended data is far more than just regulatory data. It stretches across the entire organization with different ownerships located at the R&D level. And also because of our data model change, we need to adapt and extend our analytics. IDMP impacts also our RIM processes. So the processes we incorporate into our system, we heard about it today, about the in-progress data compilation. So it's about pre-approval data collection and setup. So we cannot anymore in future one day collect data once we get our authorization. We have to send it along with our authorization. It's part of the procedure. So that means that data and documents are compiled, reviewed, approved together. An important aspect also is how to deal with parallel variations in future, which are impacting specifically the same data points. We already have challenges today when we think about on the dossier or the sequence level, how to deal with changes impacting the same sections. There are some guidances also by the agency, but it is a very complex topic, and this topic will now expand also to the level of the data. Combined and connected tracking, as I said, between the documents, between the data, between our submissions, and the key business process driven by our regulatory activities. And all of this also will change the way we look in systems on change management and how to better incorporate tracking possibilities of changes across our data sets. So all in all, the impact from my perspective is that IDMP will further expand the RIM scope, if not yet in place at a specific company. It will change the data model, the exchange of data, the processes and analytical capabilities. It somehow poses more complexity to the RIM, even though this complexity does exist outside of the system today to get our changes properly implemented. So it's not really creating new complexity, it's just visualizing it better in an IT system. But at the same time, it will help us to better standardize all the data and the processes in our RIM system, which is really a good thing because we can see still a lot of variances used out there. It demands more connectivity internally within the company, but also with the agency. It demands a global view, as well as flexible incorporation of standards. So IDMP, even if we talk a lot about the European implementation, still is not a European standard only, looking at IDMP derived from ISO. And there's more than Europe, which is looking into incorporating these standards into their regional implementations. So we need to have a more global view as well here. Need to keep a flexibility to deal with changes. We saw the change in Europe of PMS implementation and DADI. It should improve our data quality and the way we manage our data. It should push us in addition to internal efforts to get to a better standard. And finally, in my opinion, it will also facilitate to move to a more holistic RIM, simply because now we cannot see anymore these processes standalone. We get more and more into a situation where we have to see all of these capabilities as part of one ecosystem. One slide about IDMP readiness of your RIM. So what should you expect from your RIM platform looking at your current RIM solution? And we set up these 5 key aspects of IDMP solution readiness. So first of all, data centricity. So making sure that data really gets the attention in your organization and in your system. It should and play a central role in your solution. The data quality, so is essential to ensure we have compliance and business efficiency. So should our solution also help us to ensure it from the beginning, next to what we need to set up on the organization and process level. The more we need to work in systems during our daily work, the higher and the more people work, and also infrequent users work in our system, the higher demand we have for a better user experience. So best your solution supports regulatory and business rules and automations and enables user to process those more efficiently. Connectivity, as mentioned, so we need to see how the system can support all your touch points of IDMP within your RIM solution or through connection or integrations to other systems. And last but not least, the fifth point, important, is flexibility for the future. So you can ask yourself, how easy can your system adapt and follow those regulations, which can come very quick and require a short attention to be implemented. My last part of the presentation today is focusing a little bit more on the Amplexor Life Science Suite and IDMP and RIM. So just to mention, for those who don't know our solution, we have at the beginning our platform, our compliance foundation. On top of the platform, we deal with master data as product data, your organization data, your study data, your referentials, everything which is the backbone for every solution which is built upon our platform, from RIM to product, submission management, document management, and labeling. And then on top, at the end, our analytics layer to be able to extract this data and use this data for reporting capabilities. If you see IDMP as just on the level of the data, then the most clear picture is that IDMP sits within our product area, where we do our compilation, validation, submission, and analytics of product data. But the IDMP impact itself across the entire Amplexor Life Science Suite touches more or less every module, because we deal with planning and tracking, we deal with inclusion later on of our published product data into our submission. We deal with documents, and not in IDMP, not only with our product information documents, but also with our Module 3 and Module 1 documents. So it touches our document management, it touches our labeling management, and finally, also our analytics. Let's have a look at some of those capabilities within the system to walk you through a little bit, to get an insight and a feeling how we incorporated those into the solution. First of all, and most important, of course, is master data as the core of IDMP, where we have our definition of our product families, our global products. We implemented so-called reusable data components, which stretch across the clinical particulars, the packaged medicinal product, the pharmaceutical product, the manufacturers you have, so the repository of your data on the master data level. We support organization, location, and contact persons in the master data area, as well as what we heard today, regulatory rules and soft intelligence. So how we can already incorporate certain standards to facilitate later on the data entry. We have embedded IDMP terminology in the area of vocabularies, which represent the terminology we use from SPOR source controlled vocabularies and vocabulary terms within one vocabulary, which are then finally used in our product data sets, but not only in our product data sets, of course, but looking at this topic, I decided to go with this example for now. We embedded also OMS data, which means that we have all the OMS data from SPOR, so the organization and the locations itself. We can synchronize this data either manually on demand if we need it, if we need real-time information, or through a job which runs every night or based on a defined schedule. Master product records are created like our product families and global products based on specific components. These are complex structures at the end, because a product may contain different pharmaceutical products. It may contain many different packaging presentations. Within a packaging presentation, you might have different packaged items contained. You might have different manufactured items. All of them have different manufacturers. They can be linked to a specific certified master file, etc. So all of this data connects in a product record. And we introduced the possibility to use component-based product management here. So we can link and unlink different components into our product master data from our repository. Referencing master data means also referencing master data across all solutions. So it's not only about regulatory, but it is also about using this master data, for example, in our quality solution. So we are using the same records, which helps you later on in all tracking, analytics, and exchange. From the product master data up to the organizations, I just pulled an example of a PQR plan here. Analytics, we heard some topics around it. So we incorporate also interactive dashboards to be able, for example, to track different statuses of our data submissions, but also the compliance, for example, to our submission timelines, which at the end, or for now, are given on the level of XCV-MPD, where we know we have to submit within 30 days or 15 days. But for sure will also be applicable later on for the IDMP as part of our regulatory activity and ECTD submission. We also have interactive exportable IDMP reports, because dashboards can help us to quickly navigate and get the key insight and KPIs we require. But sometimes we need also to export the data in specific format for sharing of this information. Important aspect for data quality in the system is also data entry validation, to make sure that first of all, we use standards for the data entry of our values. Second of all, we ensure that we can validate certain data upon data entry and inform the user about necessary corrections to be done. And those data validations can be context dependent, because we might have different, or we have actually different validations depending on the format we submit, which might be none for the majority of the world, and in Europe can differ between IDMP and XCV-MPD business rules. Data validation triggers are implemented in a way that we can run data validation on demand at any point in time, but also they are incorporated in the process. So before I can send my data record, my product data, to the approver to get the approval, the system will mandate actually to make sure that all the data is right according to the different business validation rules. So I will first have to pass the validation in order to send my data set internally for approval before it's submitted to the agency. Tooltips for data entry, we are incorporated different on the attribute level of different components, different tooltips, which gives us, for example, the information about the source of the standard, how it is interpreted in XCV-MPD, and how it is defined in IDMP, if existing, which helps us to guide the data entry of the user. Last two things are kind of important for me, and that's flexible granularity based on the data submission needs. So a very important aspect is to detach the level of the submission format from the level of how and which data we are actually connecting. In this case, we have for Europe the possibility to define. We will have different submission formats. Currently, only XCVMPD is an allowed submission format. In future, it will be IDMP as well. And based on this, we can create more simple or more complex product data set. Important to mention is that our data model is designed in a way that we can submit XCVMPD based on IDMP data model, which may actually help you to already collect your data when you still submit your XCVMPD data in the background according to the current specifications and agency required formats. We have use case-based automations within the end-to-end, since we do all the planning, tracking, registrations, and data submissions in one chunk. We can also automate certain activities. I just pulled one example where we enter our approval letter and our approval details. The system automatically transfers those details to the respective marketing authorization component and updates the data as required. For example, if our authorization number changed, or our validity changed, or the authorization status of our product changed. In order to get through the data, we collect, review, we have collection, review, and approval workflows. So we can indicate what is our enrichment status for IDMP. Did we reach already the data level we require for internal purposes? We have tasks which are sent alongside with the data, and we have the possibility, like we have it on documents, and we are used in industry to do that, to sign off this data in an electronic signature way. And of course, in the entire suite, we use life cycles and versioning to keep abreast of the changes and be able to use it later on for any further assessments. Regulatory activity-driven processes, so the future target operating model is, for me, also very, very important aspect. I don't want to track everything in different places, because at the end, our activity drives our status tracking, yeah? From the planning to compilation to the agency submission. We might dispatch it to the affiliate, they will dispatch it to the agency. So we have one central point which should drive all the other connected aspects, like, for example, our PMS data set, which is submitted along with our dossier. And this data set is basically transformed into a FHIR message in this example, which is included into the ECTD sequence. So by moving my regulatory activity to submit it to agency state, the system can automatically update all the connections and say, oh, my dossier is submitted, my PMS data set is submitted, and the PMS data set is part of the ECTD. And this guarantees me a smooth and seamless connected tracking of the status across all the elements I'm exchanging. Last slide, I think here on the solution side is advanced change management, something we are currently looking at, how to better represent to the user the changes we are doing on our data, because data becomes more complex, more hierarchical, more structured, and this gives us a huge opportunity based on the standardization and based on the referential model we are using to track those changes across different products, which also then enables us in future to better update these changes or to run an impact assessment and propose these changes, for example, to our local registrations. My last key takeaways for today is, yes, IDMP brings some challenges into RIM. It reflects actually the real challenges we anyway have, but it reflects it on the system side, so it's very obvious then, but also brings a lot of opportunities, as we heard. We should consider IDMP as part of our RIM. It's not really, for me personally, a standalone solution because it touches, it's incorporated in all the flows a RIM system should support you on. I think you should pay attention to the importance of connected submission and publishing system. Today we track XCV-MPD outside, so it's standalone, it's sent afterwards, we can track it and so on, we go send it to the gateway or we use EV-Web. But tomorrow, if it sits within our ECTD, we will create it in RIM, we will move it to the submission and dossier, we will then publish and submit it from there. Then we will need to put in the information back that we submitted it. Then we will track again something in RIM. That can become very complicated. Yeah, think about where that in future data submissions will also happen with inside your submission, which you publish and submit to the agency. Get your RIM system IDMP ready. Yes, we have more time, and that's good. Because it's a complex topic and it takes time to adopt across agency industries and vendors. That's natural. And pay attention to the key aspects I mentioned to date about IDMP solution readiness, how data-centric is your system, how much data quality assurance does your system support next to your data quality framework you should have in place, what about user experience, how well is it connected inside and outside, and how flexible are you able to react to future changes within one region, but also for adoption across regions. And with this, I would finish my presentation for today, day one, completed, and see if there are any other questions for me.
Okay, thanks, Agnes. Yeah, we have got a few questions here just before we reach the end of the session. So let's kick off with, how is Amplexor Life Sciences dealing with the changes resulting from the EMA IDMP roadmap updates?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We are monitoring, especially my team and the product management team, we are monitoring the changes and the roadmap of the EMA. Mainly on a weekly basis. And we have a very flexible solution, so we have to adapt our roadmap and our plans accordingly to it. So since we are anyway doing regular roadmap updates and reprioritizations, which comes from our projects, from our client requests, but also from changing regulations, this might be IDMP, but this is also applicable for any updates to ECTD, etc. We basically can flexibly adopt by monitoring, being aware, and also agreeing with our clients on the next steps in the implementation.
Okay, great. Will Amplexor Life Sciences support XEVPRM submissions based on the IDMP data model?
Yes, that's one of our key highlights, actually, which I wanted to also mention within the presentation. We decided to go that way so that companies can take their time to collect the data, which is complex to collect and to transform into the future model, while they still, based on this data, can submit XCV-MPD, and obviously it will be required longer than we potentially would like to, but that's the case from the agency perspective. So you can use the system to collect the data. We use one data model, and we incorporated all that transformation in a way that from this data we can still submit a valid XCV-MPD record to the EMA as long as it is required.
Okay. And finally, excuse me, we have a publishing system and a separate RIM system. What do you consider the challenge for IDMP? So I guess that comes to sort of trying to connect those disparate systems.
I think, as I mentioned in the presentation itself, we see that that RIM itself, companies have already quite good touch point to the DMS, as well as the product information management. But publishing systems are seen or used still pretty much standalone. And now looking at the future target operating model, which will require not for every submission, but for many submissions to include our data into the dossier, then this tracking becomes more complicated if we have to manually or semi-automatically reflect the statuses in the various systems. So I think what is really, really important, and I call it somehow my triangle of systems, is to really get RIM, DMS, and submission very close together, because all of these elements at the end form what you are submitting to the agency. And in RIM, you are basically planning and tracking the progress and can automate all the aspects alongside.
Okay, and one final question there from Nicholas, Nicholas Sherman, which I think you can see on screen. Regarding the maintenance of IDMP data, will it be possible to import certain structured data sets from third-party software or send them to ALSS via an API data warehouse? Or will it be necessary to manually amend data fields which are related to regulatory activities? So I don't know if you want to address those in sort of bit by bit.
Yeah, I think I get this question, even though it just disappeared from the screen. So our first primary focus was in the IDMP journey of implementation to enable that we have the data model in place in the solution and that it's using the correct and coded vocabularies we need in order to start the collection of data for our ongoing projects and clients. One of the next activities we are looking at is also how are we going to load this data and transform this data, specifically for our existing clients who already use our solution and will move to a future update, which will enable them to use the IDMP aspects in the Amplexor Life Science Suite. So yes, that's something we are looking for, but as everything in IDMP, it comes through a phased approach of implementation.
Okay. From Heinrich Meiss, is it possible to translate XCVMPD data automatically into the IDMP data format?
It depends on if it's how the question is meant, but generally, yes. I mean, the EMA published that's what EMA is also doing on a certain to a certain degree, because they are migrating the CVMPD data to PMS database, and you have chapter 6, where you have all the information about the data migration rules, and so that's why it is possible. We also use the IDMP data model and still create CVMPD. So there is a certain mapping available, even though I have to admit that the guidelines are not fully accurate in all regards of the transformation, or at least not complete yet. So there is still some room for improvement of certain mapping required. As for when you talk more about our existing clients, so I think that goes a little bit back to the question before, how to transform the data in the existing system to the new IDMP data model. And that's definitely something which we are looking together with our clients in one of our next steps to also enable them to jump on a new solution version.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Agnes. It's been very interesting. And I know that we are now inviting the customer circles ticket holders to join the private session with Agnes. Otherwise, we hope to see everybody again tomorrow at 3 p.m. when Tris Knuckles of Navitas, Hyperion's Remco Munich, and Renato Ravik from Amplexor Life Sciences will join us for more deep dives into the topics that matter. So thanks everybody for joining today, and have a great afternoon.